Good morning, everyone. This is Tammy Zadunik, Director of Member Experience and Training Solutions with the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. I'll be your moderator for today's program. Thank you for joining us. This is a private presentation not open to the media. Secondary recording of any portion of this presentation is strictly prohibited. Today, we're pleased to present another webinar in our Workforce Solutions series, Finding and Retaining Your Best Employees. The webinar is being recorded and will be available shortly after the live presentation for on-demand viewing. Participant cameras and audios will be unavailable during the presentation. If you need assistance at any time today, please type your comments into the chat box. You may also type your questions into the Q&A box if you prefer. A copy of the presentation slides will be shared in the chat box. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Muth with HR Bones.
Hey, thanks, folks. Appreciate your coming in and spending a little bit of time with us today. Thank you, Tammy, for the nice introduction and all the legalese that needs to come with that. I'd like to, let's see if we can get the computer to work first, huh? How's that? Okay. Bear with me, Miss Tammy. Can you hear me okay? There we go. Hey, it worked. Okay, as Tammy said, I am with HR Bones, and we are a consulting firm. We've been doing this for about 6 years. We cover pretty much all those topics out there in HR. That you can imagine, you name it, getting involved in pretty much everything from retention, staffing, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to go through a bunch of those today. My challenge being, of course, trying to take a topic that, for those of you who don't know, I've got a full seminar that goes 6-7 hours on staffing alone. So I'm going to have to do a lot of condensing and doing a lot of fast talking. So with that said, I also want you to feel comfortable to go ahead and interject. If you need to, go ahead and raise your hand. Tammy, do me a favor. If it turns out I don't see it because I do get distracted, please let me know, or somebody tap in and try and get me involved, because sometimes the computer doesn't work the way I want it to. Let's start with a little bit of background about me. I've got 30 years of HR experience. I've been doing it since the late 80s. I've got a master's degree in labor relations and HR. Here's where I've lost about half my audience if you're in the state of Michigan, meaning if you're a fan of that school in Ann Arbor, U of M, you may take a disliking to that. But trust me, a lot of love here. I've got 2 brothers and a sister that went to U of M, by the way. Got my BA on psych as well from there. Had a staffing firm in Texas, Houston specifically, for about 9 years. I've worked in large, small, medium-sized organizations, multi-billion-dollar companies to small mom and pop type operations with as few as 100 employees. And a good number of those organizations, by the way, 3 of them actually were international. So I've done work in the Mideast, South America, Europe, etc. Lived in all those places as well. Actively involved in consulting, as I mentioned, for 6 years. A couple of tidbits. I've had major health issues the last couple of years. I'm getting older. And with that, spinal cord surgery with about a 15% chance of being a quadriplegic, reconstructive surgery on my femur. Actually 3 times, in that initial injury involved our German Shepherd Ferris, who gets very active. When I was running, I fractured it. It was really ugly, and took us about 2 years. Actually, I was in a walker and or a cane. Had a cancer scare, etc. I don't know. I just thought it would be interesting to put that in. I was stuck on a boat a couple of years ago as part of the COVID controversy early on. That was fun. I spent a lot of time talking to the media as things got a bit out of control. I'd like to ask a couple of questions for you. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to go ahead and put a poll up real quick. I want to ask you, and I'm going to start from the beginning here, and I'm hopefully you're going to be able to see this because this is my first go around with this. I'm going to put a question up, and hopefully you can see that now. Can you see it, folks? I hope. I'm going to ask you to go.
It's not up, Steve.
It isn't? Okay, well, that's interesting, because I've got it up here and it's asked. Okay, bear with me. Let's try this. Let me ask you this. Is it up now?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you're sharing the results though.
So the problem is it's not, the problem is it's not letting me get back into it as to answer the question, because it's thinking that we already asked it. So is it possible for you to get in and change this? Is that a possibility or no? Did we lose this? Because folks, so you know, we went through this earlier on to make sure the polling went right. And I think what happened was it's automatically assuming that we're done with the polling. Is there a way to get this back into the system before we end this, Tammy, or no? I'm guessing not.
Yeah, without closing out of it, we can't. So you're just gonna have to bypass question 1 and hopefully move to just question 2.
Okay, well, let's go to, that's fine. Let's go ahead and see if we can get to question 2 anyway. I just want to be able to see how many of these we'll actually be able to do. Yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to get to that either, because I don't think you folks can actually see any of this either, can you? As we did
No,
both.
they're showing, but it's the results that are showing. It's not
Hard
showing
to
the
throw.
question.
Okay. Okay, so much for technical issues, folks.
Try question 3.
We will go to question 3 and see if that one works. How long have you been in your current position? I'm going to go ahead and launch this question right now, and you should be able to see it now.
Yeah, that one's fine. So
Okay.
it's just not showing the first 2.
Outstanding. So yeah, what I'm looking for is how many of you folks out there, how long have you been in this particular field and what you're doing? Now, what's interesting is, yeah, so 100% of you have answered. Thank you very much. So here's the deal. We've got a very interesting dynamic in terms of almost even distribution. Folks who are new within the first year or 2, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 or more, which is about what I expected. So I want to thank you for sharing that. My next question, or one of my previous questions, should have been how much of that has been in HR. And so I'm not going to be able to ask that question at this point in time. But anyway, so that's the results. Hopefully, bear with me here. Hopefully you can see those results. That basically showing you that where you fit within this particular bandwidth, as I mentioned, a fairly even distribution with a slight edge going to people who are in the 3 to 5 year range, which makes a lot of sense. Interesting. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to get out of this. We're going to go to the next question, or the next slide, I should say, if it's going to allow me, which of course it is not. Bear with me. Let me get the poll up. I think I have to shut down the poll is what I got to do to move on. And of course, it's not advancing.
You should just, if you're in your slideshow presentation, just forward your slide, use your arrows on your keyboard.
Exactly what I'm doing, and unfortunately, it's reacting slowly. Here we go. So we're going to talk about basically 2 areas of focus today. One is going to be finding and hiring employees. The second is going to be on retaining or retention of your employees. We're going to start real quickly about the issues that have gotten us where we are today, and a lot of this has to do with that experience we had with COVID. So what we have now, by the way, forgive me folks for if you hear dogs in the background, it's because here in my home office, I'm babysitting a couple of dogs, and Ferris, the ugly German Shepherd, by the way, is also making his voice known. So please try and phase that out of your hearing. But anyway, so what we have right now is a graph that I thought was really interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because it shows some economic activity relative to employment here in the United States. So you're going to see these 3 lines represent full unemployed people, job openings, full quits. And what's interesting is you can see there were a couple of anomalies here. One was the Great Recession, which started back in 2008. We're all familiar with what that was about, at least those of us who were in the job market in particular. And then things kind of going in a downward trend relative to unemployment, in other words, positive activity, going back to 2020. And then what you see is some pretty dramatic activity starting in early 2020. That's when I was on that cruise ship, by the way, and I was stuck out at sea for about 26 days. And so what's interesting is you see a sharp drop in employment. You also see a sharp drop in resignations, which makes sense. People are hunkering down, knowing that there's a possibility they could lose their jobs. So quits go down and openings go down. And then what happens is a recovery. And the recovery has been sporadic and not consistent. And what happens is basically in late, say, 2021, you start to see the impact actually of what we're experiencing today, perhaps more seriously than ever before. And what that means is we now have more jobs open, people are still quitting, and we basically are going to continue to garner more open opportunities as time goes on. Now, here's some statistics I pulled off the internet in a variety of different websites. And this is basically going to put in numeric form that graph that you just saw a moment ago. As many as 48 people quit their jobs in 2021. I'm not, by the way, going to go through all of these details and read each of these tidbits to you from the slides. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, there's a lot more information I'd like to be able to cover and be conversational. And second of all, you're going to be able to get all of these slides via PDF. So you're going to be able, if you want to, at a later date, look at these statistics in more detail. And by the way, I'm willing to back up all of this information with website sourcing and or I should say sourcing specific. A lot of it, by the way, is government data. So that would be the BLS or what we call the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And essentially what you're going to see, and you're welcome to do this on your own as well, is that we indeed have had record numbers of people quit their jobs and numbers of transitions just skyrocket. One thing I would like to point out, though, is if you look back at this particular chart, if you were to have taken out, for example, the anomaly of what happened in early 2020, we're not that far off the mark, right? In terms of total job openings, yeah, those have taken a significant jump. Total quits, actually not as low as you might think, or in other words, have not skyrocketed as much as you might think. So what's happened, though, is we're used to an economic level in this country that is fairly consistent and has been, say, over the last 20 or 30 years, with the exception of the Great Recession, of course. And so now all of a sudden we look at this and the media hype and all of it that comes with it, and that's how they make their money, by the way, is getting people excited. You'll see the numbers aren't that far off. So in other words, if you were to take a ruler and put it along that green line, or even the blue line, or even the red line, we're not that far off, maybe a few percentage points. But in reality, we're such a huge economy with so many people, it looks extremely dramatic. And I think in a lot of ways it is. But in the scheme of things, we're doing okay, I think. I mean, that's my personal opinion. There tends to be, I think, a lot of gravitating towards the sensational. And so you hear about a lot of the issues that we have in the economy on the news, et cetera, but I don't think we're nearly as bad as perhaps what others do. And so I'm going to be asking a couple of questions about that in just a little bit when I go back to the polling. Because the polling can be a bit challenging for me, though, I'm probably going to bunch those up a little bit more. So what's causing all of this most recent activity that we saw looking back at that graph? Well, most people would say clearly it's COVID-19. That's part of it. But like I said, I don't think that's the whole story. You've got economic factors, the shutdown itself, the dramatic stop, then the reopening, and then the boom after. And so I think what happened was, for example, the shutdown itself, when we asked everybody to stop going to work, I think that opened up a lot of questions in a lot of people's minds. Should I go back to work? Do I have to go back to work? Do I have to go back to that job I don't like? Do I have to go back to a job that doesn't meet my expectations relative to schedule or benefits or how I want to communicate with my family? All those kinds of things. Another interesting issue, couple anyway, aging in the workforce. We've gotten all a little bit older. A couple of years puts baby boomers that much further, in particular because there's such a large number of them, towards the retirement phase. I think a lot of those people decided, I'm just going to retire continuously or permanently. Immigration was also an issue. So we don't really talk about this, but people, I think it's fairly well known that Trump cracked down on immigration in a way that we hadn't seen in a very long time. And so what that did was that put a very slow, it took a huge fountain down to a spigot or a drip as far as immigration went over the border. And then COVID, I think, further enhanced that. And so what you saw was record-paced growth for lower level jobs, people without, for example, college degrees, people without a lot of education, even high school dropouts for the first time in as many as 40 years, were actually getting some pretty decent wage growth. Had not happened before. And that those numbers now are going to, I think, be amended as we see the numbers at the border starting to pop up again. I think we're going to see, obviously, those wages stabilize and not make as many increases moving forward. I think the other thing that happened was as people moved into the stop or out of the stop that took place as a result of the COVID restrictions, it kind of took into question the issue of the relationship with the employer. People, I think, in many cases who thought they were impervious to layoff or anything bad happening thought all of a sudden, maybe there is a possibility that things could go wrong and I might not actually be able to continue on working in this particular position. Maybe I don't want to. Let's talk about the reasons most people leave their employment. Again, looking at the retention side of this. Toxic corporate culture generally comes up number one. I would argue, by the way, that in most cases, what that really means is they don't have a good relationship with their boss in any sense. Job insecurity, reorganizations, high levels of innovation, meaning that in many cases, people, for example, have been caught out of their job. I can give you several examples that we don't talk about that much in the media, but let's take, for example, the onset of, say, QuickBooks or different types of accounting programs. With those kinds of accounting programs and the efficiency that come with them, you don't need nearly as many as accounting people. So I can tell you I've had personal experience of organizations that have had literally dozens of accounting people, and then they bring in an accounting program. Let's say it's like a QuickBooks on steroids, and all of a sudden they can cut 3-4 jobs out of the picture simply because they don't need people, for example, to review all the statements. They don't need people to chase after folks for expense reports. You can do all that stuff online. All that stuff feeds in automatically from the expense report. So a lot of those accounting jobs, for example, can go away. The big one, though, the ominous one I think that we've all been hearing about is the potential issue of trucker jobs going away. With the advent of self-driving vehicles, there's this thought out there that it's not going to be too long before truckers all over the country will be laid off. You'll be able to program your car just like any Tesla that you see where the driver is sleeping behind the seat. Folks are going to be able to actually just put the trucker program in and let that sucker run and see what happens. Holy cow, that would be kind of scary. But that's a possibility. I would say one of the things that, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit as well, failure to recognize performance, failure to even communicate or recognize individual employees, that's always at the top of the list, why people want to leave. Better work-life balance, higher pay, desire to explore a new career path. I want to do something different. In some cases, people want to take care of their elderly parent or kids or whatever it might be. I'm going to go to, I'm going to see if I can go back to the poll here since it's a prompt for this. Let's see if I can, bear with me. I think we already talked about this one. How long have you been in your current position? So I'm going to go back to slide 10. How many of you folks, I'm going to go ahead and launch this. How many of you have had issues with hiring or retention of employees? How has that changed since the onset of COVID? Okay, has it gotten better, tougher, easier, or you don't know? So it looks like most of you would say that it's gotten tougher. Yes, being tougher, by the way. 82%. I've got to tell you, that kind of surprises me. Because when you look at statistics for the state of Michigan, our turnover rates are not nearly as high as they are in other parts of the country. That's fascinating. Outstanding. Very good. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot. You guys can't see. Current results. So 85% of you agree that it's gotten tougher since COVID. Again, which I find amazing. Only 15% and 0% say they don't know. So there's a lot of you out there. You're in the same boat. You feel the same way. I find that interesting. So what I'm going to do, you know what? I'm going to go to the next polling question because there's actually two here. So bear with me. So this basically was, is it harder? This is basically a follow-up. So forgive me, folks. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to put that in. It's harder. 100% of you said so. Okay. Just go ahead and click on that real quick. Tammy, I'm going to ask you to tell me, because the question survey is telling me how many people are responding. Can you tell me how many total participants we have so I can know when we're done?
We have 31.
Okay. So I've got 6 holdouts right now, roughly. I'm going to end this in another 5 seconds just so we can get this resolved. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. So yes, 96% of you think it's gotten harder, 4% think it's actually easier. That's interesting. I've got one other question I'm going to ask you as a group here. Question 3. I want you to tell me what your annual turnover rate is. Just so you know, your annual turnover rate is how many people leave your organization over the course of the year. If you have 100 employees and 3 people left, you have 3% turnover. So this is a fascinating figure as well. We're getting a lot of different answers here all over the map, and it's a fairly even distribution. I feel like I'm calling a horse race, by the way, as I watch this move. I know you guys can't see it, but I'll be ending this poll probably in the next, I don't know, give me another 10 seconds. But it's going to be an interesting result here. You're going to find most people are in the 6 to 10% range. I've got 25 people responding. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. I'm going to share the results so you can see. So of this group here, you're looking at the bulk actually are 6 to 10%, but there's a healthy number that have 11 to 20% turnover. Now, let me just say a couple of things. Depending on the industry you're in, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about this in a little bit, that may not be out of whack. People know that generally speaking, for example, the restaurant industry, hospitality, 16 to 20% turnover rate is expected. In some places in manufacturing, for example, it's not unheard of to see even 50%. I had an employer I worked with in Canada that easily had a 40 to 50% turnover rate and really couldn't care less. So, but that's interesting. So as you can see, turnover rates are increasing and they're getting higher with time, unfortunately. So let me go ahead and stop sharing this. I'm going to see when the next, okay, we're going to wait till slide 15 for the next one. Bear with me. It's not what I want. Of course, I'm having difficulty with this. There we go. So let's start with how we deal with finding the right person. First of all, it starts with a job description, right? It needs to be accurate. And so in many of the smaller employers, and if I had, by the way, I'd be asking survey questions throughout this whole thing, but unfortunately, I've got to get through a lot of information in a short period of time, so I can't do that. But a lot of smaller employers don't even bother with job descriptions. This is a big mistake. You want to make sure that as you go about looking for the right people, you're looking for people that have the right attributes for the right kind of work. The job description is the way to get there. The second thing you need to do is make sure that you have a strong understanding of your company. What are the positives and the negatives of working there? What is your brand recognition? What do people in the community think about it? Do you have any brand recognition? What are you doing to try and build that from an employer's perspective? And then probably the most importantly for all the positions, what's your culture like? Is your culture a positive culture? Is it negative? Are you honest with people about it? What makes it good? What makes it bad? Can you give actual feedback to somebody as they're looking at your organization, why your culture is the way it is and how it feeds to your success or challenges moving forward? That's, I think, a huge issue. So here's the next critical component, I think, of what it takes. And this is, I would say, by the way, my secret sauce as far as a recruiter looks, looking back at my history. If I've been successful, it's because I've been able to find people who fit the right kind of job and have the right kind of attributes. And what that means is you have to look at your current employee group and those that have worked for you historically, and what was it that made them successful at your company? Look at the background. What is it? Do they come from a particular industry? Do they have a particular degree type? Do they have a particular personality type? Keeping in mind, we can't be discriminatory in any way, but you want to make sure that you're looking for people that have the best chance for success. And I can go through many different organizations that have really good history with this. The US military, by the way, has been very good. The insurance industry has been very good at this. They can profile a person if they want to and come up with a strong factor as to whether or not they will be successful within that role. Long-term, short-term, and mid-range. And they go after people. It's interesting. I've had some experience in that industry. In my own personal experience, in the refinery, for example, there are two groups that I had great success with recruiting. It took me about, I'd say, 6 months to 9 months to figure it out. But those two groups were, believe it or not, folks who had experience in the military. And then number two, people who had experience in agriculture. So if you worked on a farm, you grew up on a farm, your grandpa was a farmer and you worked on the farm or what have you, for some reason, those kinds of individuals tended to do very well in the refinery. If you came in from a retail environment, you came off the floor at, let's say, the local big box store, chances are you weren't going to do well there. One of the things I want to talk about, though, too, is that, and this is really common in different industries, and I'm going to, hopefully I'd be able to ask you a survey about this. I don't think I asked this question, but you're going to hear this fairly common in a lot of different industries. And I hear it because I've been through a number of different industries. And that is, we have to have manufacturing experience, or we need somebody who's absolutely got to have medical experience. Here we are, we're in a clinic. I want somebody who has medical experience. And I think those, in many cases, are myths. And I want you to, as the HR person or the person responsible for staffing or filling jobs in your organization, I want you to push back when you hear that. And the reason is because when you do that, you automatically cut off and limit a huge number of qualified individuals who very well could be the very best candidates. And you're going to wipe them off the slate right off the beginning just because they don't have, say, medical on their resume, or they don't have construction, or whatever it is that particular function is. What you want to do is find somebody who has those traits, even though they don't necessarily have that industry experience. So in the case of, as I mentioned before, agriculture, those people didn't have experience necessarily inside a refinery, but they were used to very tough working conditions. And when I had my staffing firm in Houston, that was a huge issue because we have very difficult working conditions in refineries, right? So you've got to be able to deal with the outside elements. You've got to be able to deal with long shifts. You've got to deal with being able to get dirty. Guess what? Agriculture meets all those needs. And so when they came into the refinery and they saw the money that came with it, by the way, that's a big plus, they were all on board. So they were very motivated to stay there long term. Never had an issue really with retention there because the money was so good and their prospects outside of the refinery were not nearly as good. You need to do the same thing. Find people that are undervalued in other industries, whether it's even other competitors, and target those groups and say, I think this might work. I've actually seen people do recruiting, by the way, out of McDonald's because they traditionally have been low pay. Of course, that's not happening quite as much anymore, right? McDonald's is starting to pay well. But the thing is that folks are targeting those kinds of employee groups, or I should say candidate groups that they think would be a very good fit for what they're doing, even though they don't have the background experience. So please, I would say push back. You hear somebody say we need somebody who's absolutely got to have XYZ experience, insurance or whatever industry you're in. I would question that. I do have a poll on this. So thank you, Mr. Slideshow, for reminding me about this. I'm going to go to the next one, which, here we go. Hopefully you can see this. Does your organization or manager believe that we have to have candidates with industry experience? This will be fascinating. So we actually see a fairly even distribution of this. By the way, I need to say as well, there are some instances where you have to have a certain level of experience in a particular field. If you have a licensure requirement, for example, let's say nursing, you got to get a nurse with a license, right? They got to have some medical experience. That's not going away. So anyway, here's the look, folks. I'm going to share the results with you right now. So a good number of you, 19%, actually just under 20, say yes. We hear that all the time. Usually is another 27 sometimes. So we're looking at just under 50%. I would say that that's what your employers are asking you to do, is find people with that type of experience. Now, let me say this. If you come up with a successful candidate that's outside your particular industry where they're telling you we've got to have that kind of experience within that industry, then you've busted the myth. And once you've busted that myth, you throw that in their face next time they tell you, by the way, we've got to have somebody with pharmaceutical experience. Say, that's not true. We hired Jane. We hired her 6 months ago. She's doing a bang up job. And she comes from whatever, not pharmacy, but manufacturing or some other area. So keep that in mind moving forward. There are better options or better ways of finding people other than the traditional of just looking for people within the industry. Now, of course, my computer's not responding quickly again. So bear with me while I try and get this to kick back in. It'll take just a minute, folks. Typical ways of finding people. Here we go. Formal referral program. We have on the right-hand side of your screen, by the way, you're going to see job boards, the traditional Monster.com, ZipRecruiter, Career Builder, Indeed. Obviously, your industry may also have particular job boards typically geared towards whatever that specialization is. It could be, again, medical, manufacturing, insurance, banking, what have you. And then on the left, we have some of the newer, more innovative ways of recruiting, right? I would say within the last couple of years, well, maybe the last 5 years, some of the issues regarding or ways of touching base with people. Social media obviously is coming on board. LinkedIn is a huge social media / recruiting opportunity for folks. Email blasts, getting anybody that's in your marketing trail, for example, for email, potentially could be an employee if they meet the criteria. So consider talking to your marketing people within your organization. Hey, by the way, we may have opportunities out there that might meet the expectations or needs of some of our customers that could come on board full bore. And that could be a great opportunity for you. Industry websites, blogs or informational websites, obviously print media, whatever the case may be. But the one thing I would like to say or ask that you do is come up with a formal referral program. What this means is that letting your employees know, those current staff members, that by the way, if you know of somebody that's looking for a job, bring them on in. We have an open door. We're looking for good candidates. What you're going to find is that endorsement does two things for you. It gives you personal information, a personal referral, and it gives you, secondly, most importantly, a much higher level of success, because that individual is more vested as they were referred by somebody personally. You're more vested in them because now you've got that associate employee who also has recommended them. So now you've got a connection there that actually doubles your opportunity to retain that employee long term. Second of all, the performance is better. Because what you find out, and again, there are statistics that back this up, is that your very best employees are going to refer to you very good employees. And I've seen this happen throughout my career. If it's an employee who's exceptionally weak, be careful, because they may bring somebody into the fray who's not a strong employee. You'll find that consistently. So how do you find most of your employees? I believe I have a poll question for this. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get to the next one. So here are several opportunities. I'm curious, how is it you find your employees? I'm going to give you about another 20 seconds to answer this. So it looks like, and I'm going to show you all the results of this fairly quickly. And by the way, one of the things I absolutely hate, folks, about webinars is it's much more difficult for you folks to respond and give me feedback. So we've got another 3 seconds. We'll call it 5 or 10 seconds. I got almost everybody responding. Okay, looks like people have stopped voting now. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the results. So here's what's interesting. 27% do use referrals, thankfully. Job boards, another 36%. Almost nobody using print media, walk-ins. Some people get folks off the website, and then 23% other. And I'm really going to be curious. I should have had a comment section in there somehow, or another way of being able to exhibit that. I'm curious what other options there were. As I put this slide together and these particular questions, I ran out of things to come up with for what I thought were mainstream ways of getting people. So you foiled me, folks. I'm going to have to come back and find out through another means, actually, in terms of how that happens. So those are all the characteristic ways you do it. And so bear with me as I try and get my computer again to get to the next level. So let's talk about how retention and recruitment are interjoined, right? We have the recruitment process, which leads to employees, which leads us to the issue of retention. And what we find is statistically, there's a direct connection between both the process, recruitment, and onboarding, and how long people will stay with you. And because the reason for that is it gives people an indication of just how much you want them as an employee and how you'll treat them as an employee. So I tell folks, treat folks well through that recruitment process. Be timely, get back to people right away. Don't have folks sitting out in the lobby for 45 minutes for their interview. Certainly don't ghost people, not respond. If folks are there in the lobby and you can't get to them right away, acknowledge it, bring them out of water, whatever you can do. What you want to do is be polite, genuine. You want to make sure that they understand you value them as a person, and this is the beginning of the relationship. Kind of like if you go on a date with somebody, it's been a long time since I've dated, by the way, but you go on a date and that individual acts completely disinterested, well, you're going to probably be disinterested too. And that makes sense. A lot of employers have lost sight of that, in particular because over the previous decades, we've had a lot of situations where the employer was king or queen, and they basically treat people however they wanted to and still get folks in the door and get them at the lowest wage possible, and people just had to live with it at that point in time. Well, nowadays it's different. I would suggest that you do what you can to come up with a formal plan. And oh, by the way, I would also ask that for people who are involved in the process, you let them know as well. We're going to do some changes here. We've got some rules regarding recruitment. Just so you know, we don't want people waiting. If you can't get to them, you have to get back to me. Come up with your 6 guideline points as to how you're going to treat people differently. And if you treat them better than the competition, all things being equal, guess who's going to get that employee? You will. So hopefully your employer, your boss, the CEO, everybody's going to fall in line. You'll be able to treat people better. And by the way, that doesn't cost a lot of money. Just treating people well and acknowledging them and being nice to them is a no-brainer in my book. A couple of other quick points. And again, folks, I have a 6-hour complete seminar on the issue of recruitment and staffing, so I'm going to continue to go real fast here. You want to do what we call a realistic job preview. What I mean by that is somebody in the process, whether it's you as the HR or administrative person or somebody who's the direct supervisor, you need to tell them, look, here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, this is a great place to work. We have great teamwork, but just, it gets hotter than heck out in that factory. Or it gets really cold in the winter when we do X. Or you know what? Sometimes the hours get really crazy stupid here. I had to work last week till 7 o'clock, and I hate that, but I have to do it because I love my job. And here's the thing, when you are completely honest with people on those issues, your retention rates go up significantly. Actually, studies indicate it could be anywhere from as little as 20 to as much as 40%. You have a better chance of keeping people. The reason is you're essentially challenging them. You're saying, look, here's what it takes. Okay, these are the challenges. Know when you take this job, this is something you have to deal with. If you don't tell them, then their impression is that you aren't being honest. They look at you as an employer of less integrity. It's like, hey, nobody told me I was going to have to work till 8 o'clock at night on Saturday, or I'd have to come in on a Sunday. Nobody told me that. All of a sudden, it feels like you're the bad person, and I feel like I was lied to. But if you tell them on the front end, then it's a completely different scenario and mindset. So please be honest with people. Tell them from the get-go. The other thing is what goes right with that is don't sell the job, right? Be honest with them. And if you basically lay out all the good, the bad, and the ugly, then you're going to have them long-term. So I want to expand that into the onboarding process, right? So this slide called Solid Introduction. You want to make sure that you treat people nicely from the get-go. And I suggest that you have, again, a formal process for doing that. Put in writing and let people know that, okay, when an employee comes in, we will greet them at 8 o'clock in the morning. This person X, either HR, administrator, supervisor, will greet that person and give them a tour and introduce them to people in the department. They will do X, they will do Y, they will offer them something in the morning for coffee, for example, or a donut, whatever that kind of thing is. I would also ask you to consider a mentoring program. As people come into play, again, statistics show that if an individual, a new employee, has a mentor and somebody that they can rely on for informal information, questions about how things operate within the company without it necessarily being their supervisor, because that's always the option, but it's always good to have somebody else you can come back to and say, hey, is this right? Is this wrong? How should I handle this situation? The retention rates go up. So that's a fabulous way. Again, doesn't cost a lot of money. And by the way, it provides somebody a social contact and hopefully a family type contact within your company so that they will have the need to stick around with you long term. The other thing you need to do is what I call a check-in. And we're going to talk in a minute or a little bit about stay interviews, but doing a check-in basically is just you as the HR administrator person on a regular basis, put it on your calendar, 30 days out, 60 days out, 90 days out, whatever. You stop by at that person at their workstation and say, hey, how are things going? You doing all right? I just want to make sure we're glad that you came on board. We really like what you bring to the table. And I just want to make sure things are going well. And if not, maybe there's something we can do and see what they say. And what you find is, again, your retention rates go up. And the reason they go up is because people are thinking, you know what, these folks care about me. This actually matters. How I'm responding and what's happening to me in this environment, they actually care about that. And so what happens when you care about people? Guess what? They care about you. And I tell this to my clients on a regular basis because they don't often exhibit the kind of behavior where they indicate that they actually care about their employees. I was actually meeting with an insurance agency client of mine just last week. They got about 68 people, and they've got a CFO that seems to run things with an ironclad fist. And I asked questions about how to introduce something, and one was, hey, why don't we just take it to all the employees? And her response was, we will never do that. Oh, okay. Well, guess what? We have a problem here. Houston, we have a problem. We have a person who feels, and I didn't get to ask the follow-up questions on that, but we clearly have an issue with how this individual, I think, is treating employees. Interestingly, they talked and touted their culture. I'm always fascinated by it because I was doing consulting work in upstate New York this last month, and this issue came up where they were touting their culture. And it was literally in a meltdown. And I'm always wondering, how is it they're so proud of their culture when it looks like things are going so badly? The HR consultant, by the way, folks, generally only gets involved when things get really bad. And that was certainly happening there as they had multiple issues up and down. So I mentioned stay interviews. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And this basically is another way of asking the employees in a formal way, in a fairly elongated way, hey, how are things going? Do you like it? How do you like, and I'm going to have some questions on this next slide so you can see these. But basically, you're going to ask questions over the course of, say, 15 to 20 minutes. And you're going to get in and dig in as much as you can and try and get them to open up about what they like and what they don't like about where they work. And what this does, if they're being honest with you, which sometimes can be tough, is they're going to give you the keys in terms of what it takes for them to stick around. And if they say things like, I do like this place, but I wish there was more flexibility with staffing. My kids have had issues at school, or, I had an illness with one of my kids or whatever, and it seemed like there were no answers. And I was able to take care of it, but I don't know that long-term it's going to be viable for me. Well, guess what? Now you have a marching order. You have an ability to say, look, we need to look at attendance policy and some flexibility options, and we can do that. Now, let me just say this categorically. Your challenge as the HR/administrative person responsible for this is going to sometimes put you in conflict with other people in the organization. This is normal, it's natural, it's uncomfortable. I know, I've been there for 30 years. But the thing is that this is how you bring value. And if you come to my seminars, by the way, that's one of the things I talk a lot about, is how is the HR or person responsible for this function can actually add value. And what that means is adding some element of change. If you're not changing anything, then you're probably not adding any value. Certainly no more than what you were doing a year or 2 years ago when you had no issues there. So obviously there are some mundane functions that HR frequently gets involved in. Payroll, for example, benefits administration. That's all well and good, and that's great. But a lot of that can be done via technology now. It can be done via third party. I've seen situations where people are outsourcing that to the tune of $3 a month per employee. So a lot of those things are not nearly as high value. But if you can come in and bring in some of these kinds of changes, get some actual substantive change in terms of how you handle your people from an HR perspective, you can improve retention, you can improve your recruitment, and ultimately make a lot more money for your organization or your company. I will say this about the stay interview, folks. It's got a little bit of risk in the sense that if you get into discussions with people and you ask them how things are doing, and oh, by the way, I'll take a look into this. Now all of a sudden you've got a goalpost, right? Meaning that, okay, I'll look into it. At a very minimum, you need to get back to that employee. On the positive side, if you get back to that employee, we've actually made a change. Because of your concerns, we've looked at our policy for absenteeism or getting time off, and we've made some adjustments. I just want you to know we really appreciate your feedback. We hope that you agree that this change is going to satisfy your needs moving forward. We want you to be happy here. Bing, 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 win, 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 all over the place. Now, in some cases, by the way, it may not cost you any more money. I'm a consultant, by the way, so I find ways to make these kinds of situations work. But in many cases, what you find is people don't even take advantage of it as much. They just want to make sure or know that that's there for them. So if they have that issue again, if it pops up, that they're good to go. And so you've offered a solution, you fixed a problem. And again, it didn't really cost the company very much money. These, by the way, and again, I'm not going to list all of these questions because, again, you'll have this on your PDF file. And I can also send you, if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, I can actually give you a formal stay interview questionnaire that you can go ahead and personalize to your own organization. By the way, my email address, I should have put it on the front slide, is steve@hrbones.com. and I'm going to have to find a way to do that. But anyway, to get that to you. But basically, these are the kinds of questions, right? What keeps people working here? How can we make it better? These kinds of questions, they're great questions. People don't feel threatened by them. They do feel threatened sometimes, by the way, what you don't like around here. I would suggest you wait to the tail end of the interview to ask those kinds of questions and do it in a very light way, and certainly don't press people. Because the more you press people, the less likely they are to give you the answer because they're wondering how it's going to come back and haunt them, if you know what I mean. So an engagement survey, I'm a huge believer in this. It's one of the first things I do, by the way, is in HR, whether I'm a consultant or I've just started my HR job, and I've had leadership roles now for the last 20 years in some 5 different companies. But the first thing I want to do is an engagement survey, because that tells me what people are happy with and what they're not happy with. And if it's done the right way, in an anonymous way, it basically tells them, or tells you as the HR person, again, what you need to do, where are the areas where you need to make improvement, where do you need to influence others, where are the policies, the procedures, what are the activities that we need to do better so that we can make our employees happier. This, at the end of the day, in my view, is HR's core function, right? I say that. We can talk about payroll benefits, obviously that's a core function. Protecting the company legally, that's a core function. To me, this is number 3. It's one of those core functions that we absolutely have to be thinking about at all times, just so, again, we're showing how we add value. If we do that, then we enhance our own value, right? If we show that employees, for example, this is a huge benefit. If we show, okay, look, I started this survey and we showed that employees were at this particular level regarding, say, employee satisfaction, job satisfaction, benefits, whatever that issue is. Here we are a year later, we've surveyed them again. Look at these numbers. We've got increases of 10%, 12%, 8%, what have you. This is what we did, cause and effect, employees happier, productivity up, retention up. Guess what? You've just paid your salary, probably for the next 2 years, if you can show that kind of innovation and that kind of improvement. So how do you do this on a regular basis? Encourage your team to talk regularly, right? You probably can't talk with everybody, but certainly make it part of your culture. Recognize milestones, things like birthdays, work anniversaries, relationships, marriages, kids graduating, almost anything that's happening that's important to that employee. And as long as they feel comfortable with it, which most times they do, recognize it, talk about it, put it in the newsletter, put it up on the screen in the cafeteria, do what you can to show people that this is going on. Hey, that's a great thing. Company thinks it's awesome. We wish you luck in that endeavor, or happy birthday, many more, whatever. Reward good behavior. If you see somebody doing something, especially if it's outside the job description, reward that. Let everybody know. Make a big deal about it, right? That's one of the things we really don't do. Employers generally do not spend enough time looking for ways to reward people. That's what you need to do. Knowing names of people, by the way, is a huge deal. I mentioned some work I did in upstate New York, and the project lead, I wasn't the project lead on that particular project, but the project lead continued to call one of my associates by the name of Kelsey, and we were going on week 3. This was funny to me because this was an HR consulting project, and she didn't get the memo that in HR, you should at least know somebody's name. But that's the way to recognize them as a human being. At the end of the day, by the way, what you really want is a culture of family. This, by the way, this ugly portrait you see to the right is an old portrait that came out of my grandmother's apartment back in 1986. I believe it's either the Kelsey family or Crum, one or the other. And I have no idea who these people are, but they are my family. I'm pretty sure it was hung up in her apartment when I dealt with it back in 1986. That's how old I am. So if you recognize any of these people, or you have a portrait that's like this, please get with me and let me know. We're probably related. That's kind of scary, I know. Compensation. This is one of the primary issues regarding turnover, right? Are you paying enough? My guess is in many cases, probably not, and especially right now. And the reason is because inflation has gone up. People in many areas have underpaid employees. And here's the problem you have. You hire somebody new, they want 20% more your staff is currently making. Now you've got to answer some questions. Do you want to go ahead and offer that person that much money? Are you going to raise the people that are currently there? You see this in the medical field in particular, in nursing. My wife's a nurse, by the way. What you need to do at your earliest opportunity is get to what I call a BLS, or Bureau of Labor Statistics website. Salary.com, by the way, is one of the better ones out there. It tends to be fraught with pop-ups and a lot of annoying information, but at least it's BLS data. And what you're able to do is put in the job title of the position you're interested in comparing data on, and up right there for that area will show you both. It'll give you a nice graphic in terms of a bell curve, how much money people are making, along with another tab over. It'll show you all the benefits, etc. And you'll get a fairly good idea of just what the salary or compensation and benefits should be for that particular position. You have to keep in mind that it's probably data that's about a year old. Add 7%, that's about where we are for inflation right now. So I would suggest you do that just to make sure that people are basically getting paid what they should. If not, then you run the risk of losing it. It's one of the first things people look at. Are you above or below the market? So let's look at structure variations that are pretty common. You've got telecommuting, and again, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but we all know that telecommuting, meetings via Zoom like we're doing today are becoming much more common where they can. Flex time, changing hours, for example, days, lengths of shifts, mitigating or changing up job duties. Now you're not just going to be the QA person, we'll have you do some production. This happens in manufacturing a lot because people get horribly bored doing one particular type of activity. Again, whether it's working the assembly line or what have you, we're going to break it up. So 3 days of the week, for example, you're working the assembly line, and 2 days you'll be doing quality work, and maybe 1 day you'll be doing cleanup or maintenance or what have you. Consider doing that, because what it shows your employees is, again, you're interested in making their job more interesting. You're willing to do things to keep them around. That attention means a lot to a lot of people. The one thing I will say, and by the way, the results are fairly consistent. Statistically, it shows that it improves morale, decreases turnover, reduces absenteeism, you name it. There's a lot of positives when you do that kind of activity. That being said, and by the way, I worked with a company called Blue Apron. You might have seen some of their advertisement out there. They send pre-packaged food items to home so that people can basically cook up that stuff. That was a huge deal for them. They're in Linden, New Jersey. I was there back in December. And for them, their biggest selling point was you have basically a 3-day work shift. You do 12, 12, and 12, you're done for the week. And by the way, if you want to make an extra 4 hours, you can do that too. You get your full 40 in. And people absolutely love that. And they had people that have been working there for a number of years, specifically because they really liked that benefit. You could do the same thing. Now, that said, I will say there's some caveats here. You might recall there was a guy who ran Better.com, Vishal Garg. He laid off 900 people virtually in Zoom back in December. It made the media because it was so callous and difficult. But what happened was he did an analysis, and he found that of the people that were working from home, he had a large swath or number of employees that were working as little as 2 hours a day. This made him very unhappy as they were losing money. So he made a very calculated decision and executed it in a very poor way and basically laid off 900 people. I would offer to you this. If you're going to give people those kinds of opportunities to work from home, etc., find ways to measure their work and understand that chances are they're going to be a little less efficient than they would be if they were in your job place, right? So, while the cat's away, the mice will play. And chances are your cat's not, or the employer's not going to be in the home. Be very cautious about ways of measuring that productivity, by the way. Certainly don't use a camera, but there's a number of other ways to measure that productivity. Just be very cautious and keep your eye on the productivity. So we're going to look real quickly here at turnover because I'm running short of time. Turnover is not good no matter what it is. I don't care what anybody says. There's a certain number that's acceptable generally for most organizations. I always try and cut that down to the least amount possible. You're going to see there's a website up here posted. It'll also be on your PDF. Whatever your particular industry is or type of position, there's actually a turnover area that's going to be indicated. In other words, you'll be able to tell what the turnover is if you're in manufacturing in Michigan. It'll tell you exactly what those numbers are for your area. Let's talk real quickly about exit interviews because we're wrapping up. This is your last interview, obviously, with people as they are leaving the organization. You want to make sure you do these. This is important. Why? Because it gives you the data you need to know why people are leaving the company. You don't collect the data you don't know. So one, you want to make sure you do a comprehensive exit interview. Ask all questions of all people, all areas. You want to make sure you get good detail on it. What is it you didn't like about the shift? What is it you didn't like about management? What is it you didn't like about the benefits? You got to keep the data, and you want to make sure that you keep that long term so that you can look at it over an extended period of time. So I'm going to ask you a poll here as we're getting ready to wrap up. Bear with me. I'm going to stop sharing this. We're going to go to the next one. I'm going to ask you all, first of all, do you currently conduct exit interviews? I'm liking these numbers, people, big time. I'm going to show them to you here in a minute. I'd like a few more people to vote. If you haven't voted, by the way, I don't think you can vote twice. That's a hot topic. Anyway, people get really upset about that. Okay, so here's the deal. 82% of the folks out there have said that, yes, they do in fact do exit interviews. That's interesting to me. And the next question I think is going to be also very interesting. 82%, I'm actually kind of surprised with that, to tell you the truth. So I'm going to go ahead and ask, here's the second part of the question. Are you doing it electronically? In person or both? Okay, interestingly, 37, here, let me show this because I think we're done. I think I'm losing people actually as well. So the results showed this: 5% electronically, 58% in person, 37% both. Here's the thing, you need to do it electronically, folks. And the reason is because that's the best way to retain the information, right? If you're doing it in person, that's great. It gives you knowledge. And by the way, I recommend you do both, absolutely, but you want to make sure you also do it electronically. And what that does is it gives you a way to do a baseline and then measure yourself moving forward so that you can see whether or not you've actually had any impact with your HR programs trying to move forward. Let me go ahead and I've got one more. Do you maintain or store the data? Now this, I feel kind of bad about this because I just told you how important it was to maintain the data. Sorry about that. Okay, I'd like a few more votes coming in. So if you're sipping your coffee or you're coming back, come back to your desk real quick and click on this for me if you would. Anybody else? I'll give you another 5 seconds. And time flies. Okay, so here we go. Of course, 94% of you have told me now that yes, you in fact maintain the data. Well, good for you. Let's hope you do that. Let's hope you do it electronically as well. Okay, trying to get the counter offers. This is really common, right? Somebody's leaving the company. They've been with you for 6 years. They're a high performer. You love them. They don't love you so much anymore. Problem is they've had several months to gain up the gumption, if you will, to make a transition. Now you want to keep them around. So you want to make them a counter offer. This is frequently difficult to do for a variety of reasons, primarily because there may be factors here that you can't overcome even with more money. It could be, for example, that they don't think they have the right career path. It might be that there's a toxic environment that they view. Somebody else in the organization is bad-mouthing them. Maybe they had a bad relationship. It could be a variety of things. Statistics on how successful these are all over the place. The recruiting industry, by the way, will tell you that it never works out if you accept the counteroffer and stay. Well, they tell you that because, of course, they only make money if you make a change. So I will say there's a lot of suspect studies out there. I've heard as high as 50% of employees that accept counteroffers are gone within a year anyway. Certainly, it changes the dynamic in terms of how that employee can be perceived, whether or not they're on board as a team player, or maybe they're considered enhanced in the sense that other people want them. Shameless, we're going to do a quick shameless, I guess you'd call it a promotional deal here. HR Bones, my phone number is 759-1400. That goes directly to my cell in most cases, by the way. I do recruitment benefits, outsourcing, process improvement, union avoidance is a big one as of late. I do have also, by the way, I should say, a new webinar coming up here. This is highly unusual, but on June 2, I'm going to do what used to be HR 101. I used to do it for the chamber. We'll hope to do it again for them, but right now they're not doing as many in-person events. So to do this, it's only 99 bucks, by the way. It's less than half what the normal charge would be. Don't expect that to last for a long period of time. Anyway, questions, comments, concerns. I am like right on I think I'm right at the 1 hour mark, but I'm happy to stick around. Tammy, I don't know if there's a way, can people perhaps, oh, here we go. I got a
Well,
Q&A.
there's two questions in the Q&A.
Okay, how many job boards do we recommend posting in a position simultaneously? Here's the thing, cost being a factor, my answer would be this. I would not hesitate to put them on as many, depending on the number of responses you get. It doesn't hurt to put 3 to 5 up there. A minimum 2, I would say. And basically what that does is it gives you a very good opportunity of getting the right number of people. The better question is, what does the job description look like? And in other words, that posting, and what is it that would turn people off? And if you want to send me what one of those looks like and you don't think you're getting a good response, I'll be happy to give you my professional feedback for free in terms of what you need to do to pump that up. What is your response to the thought that what seems like most of Generation Z and millennials think that HR managers saying your company culture is like a family is a negative thing or a red flag? Really? Okay, it's a red flag. I dispute that wholeheartedly. And the reason I do is because, if they think family is a bad word, maybe they've got a bad dynamic at their home. But where you work becomes your family in many respects, right? You're going to spend 8-9 hours a day. In many cases, obviously, you're spending more time with your people at work than you are with your folks at home. So why wouldn't you want to be on good terms with those people? I was doing a seminar, actually consulting session a couple of years in Columbus, and this hard-nosed supervisor tells me he was in the utilities field, said, first thing I do is I tell him, I ain't your friend. I ain't going to just buddy you. You're going to do that. I was like, dude, why would you say that? You want to do just the opposite. You want to say, you know what? I'm your buddy. If you need help, I'm here to help you. I've got high standards. I've got high expectations. But you know what? I've got high expectations for me too in terms of how I'm going to benefit you and how I'm going to make you successful. So stick with me. You want a team environment. You want a family environment. And my response to those Zs and millennials that are saying that's a negative would be, okay, well, what do you want? If you don't want a family environment, you want me to yell at you and tell you to shut up and go back to work, I guess we could do that. It hasn't worked for decades, but I'd like to see or hear somebody tell me with some substance of a particular issue where having a team-based or family environment is a bad thing. How can you find diverse interns and what outlets can you use? An interesting question. Thank you, Lauren. The question there, I guess, revolves around what are your job requirements and criteria? And then the second question is, where are you going to get them currently? Now, let me say this, unfortunately, we have certain industries that lack certain people of different types of backgrounds. And that's the reality of today's workplace. So you will struggle. I will say this, if you go to institutions, for example, that cater to a particular type of community, let's say a school, if you're looking for folks who are African-American, there are certain universities, for example, that there are African-American colleges, for example, that obviously have more African-American students. I can tell you I've done diverse recruiting in areas of different sectors of geographically. So when I was in Houston, I went to the Fifth Ward, I went to, you name it, different sections of the towns or in that particular community anyway, because people who hailed from those areas tended to be of a particular background. And that gave me a very diverse team. And that was important for me because Houston's a diverse market. And so it's really, again, I'm happy to give you and by the way, thanks, Lauren, for tapping in. Lauren and I have had a couple of consulting sessions already. But Lauren, next time we talk, I'm happy to give you some options on that I think would be helpful. You just need to give me some detail and I can get you in some right directions there. Anyway, any other questions, comments? Folks, don't hesitate to call me. Again, quick issues like that are easily handled. They're free. It's a very no hassle way of getting another perspective. I actually enjoy this. This is what I do for a living. And I think we've superseded our time. Do you agree, Ms. Tammy?
We are near the end, Steve. I don't see any questions. I did share your email and your website within the chat box, so I did
Cool.
share that information with them.
Outstanding.
All right.
There's my little guys. Thank you. Do you want me to put your, how's this?
Yeah, that's perfect. I was going to ask you if you could do that for me. So thank you, Steve, for your time and expertise, and thank you to the audience for your participation. The handout, survey, and certificate are now available on the webinar registration site. The recording of this webinar will be available shortly also. I'll send you out an email, everybody, when that's ready with instructions on how to get to all that. Please find our upcoming programs at webinars.michamber.com. Today's program is copyright 2022 by the Michigan Chamber of Commerce with all rights reserved. Have a wonderful day, everybody.